I mean, back in the old days when we did uh, actual film, it cost $1,000 a minute. So there was no fishing. You caught the fish and then you acted, and they
Yeah.
told you what to say. All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, and that's one of the funny things that we're going to talk about in the episode,
Sure.
because I was born the year after your book came out.
Well, then you're dating yourself. You're 50 years old then.
Well, I am 47. You put it out in
In
73.
72, when I
No,
wrote
you
it,
no,
it
it
came
was
out in 74.
yeah, and so I was born in 74. You said you wrote it. It was published in 73 and copyrighted in 74.
Oh, yeah, we never copyrighted it. Yeah,
Uh,
that one we did. You know, copyrighted cost so much money back then. Nobody could afford to copyright anything. I mean,
no.
back in the days of video, it would take to do a time video cost about $5,000, and you were lucky to get $10,000. Now, I did Cabela's videos, and you sold a lot of those, but
Yeah.
you didn't make as much. The whole business is the guys on YouTube have made far more money than anybody that did ever producing. But
I
anyway,
wish
go
that
ahead
was the
whenever you want to start.
I wish that was well, we're recording now, just so you know.
Okay.
I
Okay.
hit that record button because everything with you, Jack, is gold.
That's all right. I've done enough television, live television, and sports shows to know what not to say.
Yeah.
It's funny with all the language, and they all had radio shows. Like 8 or 9 years old, I couldn't. The worst part, I got a great story for you because I was an artist in the military, and it was one of the greatest experiences I ever had because I got called up in college. I was playing baseball in college, and they called me up because I was in reserves. They said everybody's got to go duty. Well, leave college and go to Fort Ord. That cost me 4 dozen Platte River specials to the sergeant, so I didn't get sent to Fort Leonard Wood. And
No, it's Fort Lost in the Woods.
well, let me tell you, my father flew for the Kansas City Athletics, and they did all their baseball camps right next to Fort Leonard Wood.
Yep.
And I would go down. The school would get out in May. My grandfather came from the Philippines to Jackson Hole in June, so I had a month of nothing to do, and so I would go down to the camps. And baseball's already started. My dad was flying, and my grandmother wanted to get rid of me.
Damn good fishing down there by Fort Leonard
Well, I
Wood.
didn't know anything about that then. I went catfish fishing. Uh, the KC Municipal Stadium was right in the middle of the black area, and my family was just everybody was judged about what kind of person they were, not by the color of their skin. And so I had black people taking me fishing for catfish, and I learned about dough balls. And then my grandfather was only a fly fisherman, and then I got taken out with guiding with guides, so I learned fly fishing. So I had a real diverse background because of that, but I know I didn't want to go to Fort Leonard Wood.
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
well, hey, how about that fort up in Washington? Because my father was with Boeing at that time, and I thought it'd be nice to be close to him. He says, you don't want Fort Lewis because it rains all the time. And he said, what's my other choice? Fort Ord. Where's that? Monterey, California. I'm in.
Yeah, that's a hard decision.
Well, so anyway, I got there. They found out I played baseball. I got to play on the team, but they've also found out I could paint. And I painted murals on the walls. And we had this little uh, captain that had just come back from Vietnam. Now, this is 1966. And he was 7th Cavalry. And he had the hat and the whole thing. And he says, I want 2 murals in the dining hall. One, how about mountains? And I said, look, I'm from the Tetons. I can do a moose. And I showed him a picture. He said, perfect. And then I said, well, what else do you want? He says, well, I want Custer's Last Stand. I go, excuse me? And my uncle, who was a congressman in Independence, had this big mural from Budweiser your part of the world of Custer's Last Stand. It was a very famous one. It was in bars. It was all over.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, excuse me, Captain, but didn't they lose? Why would you want to put a picture up? Anyway, I ended up painting, and one of the greatest experiences of my life when this guy walked up to me and says, "What do how come you're getting out of everything?" I said, "Well, I'm painting." He says, "Well, can I help you?" I said, "Do you know how to paint?" He says, "No, but I can do paint by numbers." I said, "Why would I want to have you help me?" He says, "Because my father is Morrison of Morrison Knudsen Construction Company." I said, "Well, so what? I'm the owner of Paul Revere and the Raiders. How does that?" Which is a band.
Yeah.
And he said, "I can get tickets to anything. I have a chauffeur off base." Okay. So we went to the first Monterey Pop Festival, and I was able to pull off my picture in the front, fourth row, off the film with that Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, that is.
So I wish I could remember all of it. All you out there are going to wait until I'm, here I'll be 74 in September, and man, it's going away. And the worst part is my grandson says, "Who's that girl next to you?" Now I've been married 50 years coming this November 9th, which this may be the hardest time to get through that. It's always the very end of everything, but that was always my goal. Anyway, so my grandson tries to make a big deal out of that. So I returned the favor now that he's got a girlfriend who is his mother's friend and high school's daughter. So I got him all shut up. Well, let's talk fishing. We're talking about.
Yeah, guys, if you hadn't noticed, this is the Kayak Flyer podcast. Jack Dennis, the living legend, one of the last of the great survivors here. We're going to run the show intro, and then we're going to come back and why he says the word Missouri wrong. So here comes the show intro, Jack.
I'm ready.
You're listening to Kayak Flyer with your host, Sean. Tonight, we're brought to you by Tennessee Trailers, OutdoorAdventureTrailers.com. Simply the best way to get your kayak to and from the water. Bajuco Flats Fly Co. Simply the best custom-made fly rods on the market, always built to order just the way you want it. Find Bajuco Flats Fly Co. on Instagram and Facebook. StoneflyNets.com, made 100% in the great state of Arkansas with your choice of woods or burls. Stonefly nets can even be customized for that favorite fisher person in your life. Check out StoneflyNets.com for details. CutthroatFurledLeaders.com, the only leaders that I fish with. Cutthroat Furled Leaders are excellent for saltwater, freshwater, trout, bass, you name it, you can catch it with a Cutthroat Furled Leader. Head to CutthroatFurledLeaders.com, promo code Kayak to save 15%. And as a special for having Jack Dennis, I'm going to give away 3 Cutthroat Furled Leaders. 3 Cutthroat Furled Leaders free.
Wait a minute. I'm going to add a book to each one of those.
Oh, well, I'm going to win too. I'm going to throw those in. All you guys have to do, head over to our YouTube page. I know we've got a lot of loyal fans. Watch us on Facebook. We've got a lot of loyal fans that download the podcast. Head to the Kayak Flyer YouTube. Click on the video and tell us your favorite moment in this show. And you've got a book and a leader. Jack, that is awesome. Thank you so much, my friend.
Well, hey, I got to tell you your background there. The old days of filming.
Yeah, well, I got kicked out of my recording studio.
Well, hey, everybody is doing that. I mean, that's a new thing. Are we ever going to go back to saying, I love John Oliver, and he has the same background as you do.
Yeah, no, I had fish hanging on the wall. I had ducks hanging on the wall. And my wife said, you record too late at night and you laugh too loud. So I got moved into my reloading room. I reload ammunition I used to be a USPSA competition pistol guy before before there was an election and things went through the roof. And so I got moved into the concrete room underneath the porch.
It's called a bomb shelter.
Yes, I am in the bomb shelter is where I am. And I used to have this great setup and it was so pretty and I organized it on my fly table so you could see my vise like you can see yours and it was gorgeous.
Hey, I
And
used
then
to have an office. I used to have a secretary. I don't even know if they had those anymore. I used to have a lot of stuff. Used to
yeah,
have I used to have BMWs. I have a Jeep now. I mean, there's a lot of used to. So the used to is a very overused word.
yeah, it is. But you know what? And this is the thing. I look at and talking with you especially, and this is, Rick from Oasis Fly Tying Benches, got me in touch with you, and I can't thank Rick enough. Go back and listen to his episode, watch his episode, watch some of the videos I put up on YouTube with his new dubbing brush table. It's awesome.
Yeah, well,
But
he
talking with,
does the best benches. Let me
oh,
tell you, I've known him since he started, but he's a fabulous musician.
I knew he was a music teacher because I'm an English teacher, and we talked about that.
Oh gosh, please, look. The best thing I ever did was have good editors. I remember Jack Hemingway telling my dad was so good because he'd marry his wife to be his editor, and then he'd marry another one for be the editor, and he always married people that were his good editors.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be married 50 years if my wife edited my stuff. I've got kids that, and there's always Grammarly. Here's a plug for you. Get
Yeah.
Grammarly for your.
I'm gonna tell you what. I'm an English teacher. I'm a high school. They say I'm an English teacher, but I'm a literature teacher. I teach literature. I teach the pretty poems. I love American literature. British lit's good, but I live and breathe American literature, American writers, and this ironically is going to lead into a question I had about you or for you a lot sooner than I wanted to bring it up, but I understand a little bit that your father was kind of an influence for Norm Maclean's River Runs Through
No,
It.
no, no, that's not true.
Is that not
Like,
true?
it's amazing how you tell something and then it goes on. Here's the real story. I'll give you the whole story on a river runs through it. I was when I was 32 years old, I was appointed to a federal state travel commission of 5 states, included Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. Good luck trying to promote North Dakota as a tourist destination. Nebraska, believe it or not, does have some things.
Well, yeah,
South
pheasant hunting.
Dakota, no problem. Wyoming, Montana. But anyway, one of our members was the head of the Montana Fish and Game. They call it, I call it fish and game. They have wildlife thing. Everybody's changed nowadays.
Yeah.
And her husband was the guy that made the judge that made the historic water decision that you could walk up the banks of the river. So he was already a infamous guy, and she said, "Look, I'm going to bring you this guy named Norm McLean who's got a book he wants you to read. Actually, it's a trilogy of books, but he wants your opinion because he's never given it to a fly fisherman." Well, then we had this dinner, and Norman was there, and he gave me the book. He says, "Look, it's only a 4-hour read." And we had our meetings, and I had the evenings free, and we were in Helena, where he was from. And I read the book, and I came back. We met on Monday morning before we flew out, and I said, "Man, this is the greatest fly fishing book I've ever read." As I handed it back to him, it was a leather-bound book, the first one, and he took and threw the book at me. Honestly, I ducked. I said, "What's the problem, Norman?" He goes, "You don't get it. This isn't a fly fishing story. It's about me trying to understand my brother
Yeah.
through fly fishing. You don't get it. That's why I didn't want fly fishermen to read it first."
Yep.
And I said, "Norman, Norman, Norman. That's one thing I'm good at is, trying to hold situations down." Well, we sat down. I ended up rescheduling my flight. We went out and and talked about it, and and I said, I'd make a fabulous movie. He said, no, when I'm dead, maybe. But he says, you got to understand, I'm a little estranged from my family. My wife died. I'm a bit of an asshole. Sorry. And I
No, feel
said,
free to say whatever you want to on here.
yeah,
This is
well,
not
I
marked
said
for children.
curmudgeon, which I always loved that name. And so anyway, we came up, and bottom line, we kept in touch by phone. Back in the days when we had real phones before cell phones. And I was lucky enough to meet. My wife was an ER nurse in Jackson for 42 years, a real hero. She was there before they even had ERs. And she met this doctor, Dr. Close, in Big Piney, and found out that he was the guy that discovered Ebola. And his daughter was Glenn Close.
Oh, Lord.
And William Hurt, the actor, and Glenn were an item. And he came in and wanted me to sign his book. He said he got through something to Spider-Man on Broadway, Time Flies, from my book. So I told him about Norman and about the book, and they, of course, hadn't read it. And they went and bought one, come back, and said, we got to meet Norman. So I called him up, set up a meeting. And he was out on the screen with them and said, I like you guys. We could talk about doing the movie after I'm dead. And they said, look, we can get anybody to produce it. And he said, well, by the way, do you guys have licenses? Like, no. And he just went off on them. You movie people, what do you think? You got to have a license.
Yeah.
And so he called me up. I had to hold the phone about 4 feet away from me as he screamed at me. Well, down the road, somehow it got to Robert Redford, and his people came to me and said, look, we want to film it in Jackson. I'd been involved with getting a film commission. We had brought some films to Jackson Hole, and I said, look, I've read this story. I know Norman. And this was not Redford. This was his people, his Sundance people.
Right.
I said, the story belongs in Montana, and the guy you need to talk to is John Bailey, whose dad, Dan Bailey, has the fishing day, who was an idol. I mean, that's who Norman McLean idolized.
Yeah.
And that's why the fishing license thing became an issue. Anyway, bottom line, Redford went back. They researched it. They talked to Bailey, and it all happened. And I stayed out of it. We were just started. We were very involved with getting the one fly going, and I just really didn't have any time. And I knew it was safe in John's hands, and they hired all the right people. They did it right. And but I was invited, of course, to the premiere. But I went because in the movie, the old guy was exactly my grandfather. He had his hat.
Mm-hmm.
He had the same rod, the same reel, everything. And I saw it in the Teton Theater, where I saw my very first movie, which was Shane, which my grandfather was an extra in. So I saw that, and I sat there afterwards for 30 minutes, just sitting there in silence. It beat any premiere that you had gone to in Hollywood. And and it was a religion, and Norman and I did talk about my grandfather. My grandfather's the one that got me into fishing. My dad was a fisherman and a pilot, married 4 times. Need I say more? World War II hero, ended up doing well on the 747 project. So, yes, he taught me a lot about hunting. Now, you like to read, you know who his engineer was?
Who's that?
Roy Weatherby.
Oh, my Lord.
At Continental Aircraft. And I have a pre-war Model 70 made by Roy Weatherby with the stamp on it. And I gave it to my grandson. And he doesn't like $80 for the 270 Weatherby shells. So he wants to learn to reload.
I'm going to tell you what, you give him my phone number and I will get him in touch with some of the best long range distance shooters in the United States.
I have friends and we all getting together. We're going to do an antelope hunt and all this. But anyway, let's get back to fishing. I think it's very important. I went.
Yeah,
I did a
and
lot of
I'm
overseas work, and they had a announcer a lot like Kurt Gowdy in Australia, and his nickname was Hockey, and he was a brilliant sportscaster for the Australian Football League. And he had a television show in 125 countries, except you could never get into North America. And I did shows with him, and I did a speaking engagement with him. And in Australia, the big thing is a man from Snowy River to be able to recite this poem. If you know about literature, it's a wonderful poem.
yes.
And they did a movie about it and blah, blah. They do a movie about everything. And uh, anyway, he recited the whole 3 pages at the end of the book in a lodge north of Melbourne. If you don't think that's international, can you imagine hearing that from an Australian perfectly?
I
And the
used to
words
have a
are theirs.
I used to have a friend that was my dad's age who'd get drunk and jump up on a table and recite the entirety of Terence This Is Stupid Stuff by Hausman. And I found that impressive. And that's only 3
Hey,
stanzas.
I find anything like that impressive, as long as it's not swinging at somebody or shooting at somebody.
And that's a thing. And I know you don't like, and we talked about this because we've talked. I'm not going to lie to our listeners. You and I have talked, and you didn't want the traditional questions because, your book speaks for itself. You can find a ton of videos of you on YouTube. The University of Montana has a 2-hour interview with you.
I
I
talk
mean,
too much.
huh?
That's the only 2 hour video or recording because I
That's
talk too much. She said it's supposed to be an hour.
Well, Jack, I'm going to tell you right now, we have unlimited. I'm paying good money for all this software. We have unlimited. We can go until I run out of beer.
Well, unfortunately, I got the Wuhan flu, as our famous ex-president called it, or the China flu. A friend of mine went to Wuhan and set up a saltwater factory tying flies there. Amazing. The Chinese just aren't really that good of trout fly tiers, but they tie wonderful saltwater flies. And he was a saltwater expert, and he flew to. We were doing the New Mexico conclave, and he flew in from Wuhan, and I hugged him, and we hadn't seen each other in a number of years. We do sports shows together. We both came down sick. The virus went to the heart. $300,000 later. A lot of electronic stuff. Uh, Lost my sense of taste. I mean, not taste, smell, but I didn't lose my sense of taste, which is good. Smell is overrated. I can go
If
in
you've
any
ever eaten a
outhouse.
sandwich after catching a fish,
Hey, I can go in anywhere and nothing bothers me. But anyway, it came back 3 years ago, and they basically said there's nothing we can do. And I got the COVID stuff, but I've been there. It was the exact same symptoms, and my life changed quite a bit. It was time to retire, go to Salt Lake, sell everything, the stores, everything, and go to Salt Lake and watch grandchildren grow up. Now that they're in college, ending high school and in college, university, uh, we came out to North Carolina to help my youngest daughter, who's a infectious disease doctor, and her husband, who is a professor here, and they
what is
have
he a
2
professor of?
adopted kids.
What is he a professor of? Can I ask?
Human evolution.
Oh, that's
But
interesting.
mainly it's bugs. He runs a research for people we don't want to talk about. He can't talk
Gotcha.
about, but he
Yeah.
studies hummingbirds. Hedrick Lab. You can find out all the things. If you don't, you can't stall a hummingbird or a moth. The only way you can stop them from flying is with a projectile. And if you look
Really?
at the Hedrick Lab online, University of North Carolina, you can see the pictures of moths. Aerodynamically, they can fly backwards, they can fly forwards. Hummingbirds and moths.
Yeah.
He had his PhD from Harvard. Not bad for a kid that went to high school in Jackson, Wyoming.
No, not bad at all.
And my daughter, and he went to Brown, and my daughter got her residency. She went to Johns Hopkins and got a biomed. I'm pretty proud of my kid. My son is a professor at University of Texas. He was the youngest full professor in Texas history, and he does research on fuels.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and my other daughter is a doctor at Shriners Hospital in Salt Lake. So there you go. What I'm most proud of anything, is not my fly fishing career, is I got kids that are educated. And
Yeah.
their mother was a fabulous ER nurse and going off tomorrow to do vaccinations. She's volunteered to do vaccinations. So, yeah, this has been a pretty rough deal. After I had this, the doctor, who was a doctor, said, "You can take me fishing. That's going to be your rehabilitation." So, and he was a fabulous fisherman. We've known each other for years. And I started rowing him. He says, somebody ought to pay you again. Oh, I haven't done that since I was like 23 or 24. My wife said, being a fishing guide is not a way to raise a family. So that we built a store and all that jazz. And so I decided to go back and take people for foundations. Colorado Trout Unlimited, Henry's Fork Foundation, the Jackson Hole One Fly, which I was the founder of, and just do things like that. And I ended up getting a wonderful set of, probably in the upper 95%, 5% of, they were all good fishermen wanting to get better. And so I didn't have to start, and I went on the same river, two rivers, and then, I just pretty much basically got to spend the summers back in Wyoming, still retaining my residency. And last year was it. I'm going to go back. I closed it out and said, 73, you got to be thinking, somebody else needs to row you. And now I have two grandsons. Okay, anyway, that's a short version. So
I want to ask you, and this is the only real question I want to ask you. This is the only reason you're on the podcast. You can talk about anything else after this. You can talk about any of your history, your favorite stuff. I don't care. I'm not going to ask. My one thing is, how do I double haul? Because I cannot psychologically get over the idea of that.
I just got through. I do a few private lessons here in North Carolina just to get out. I started doing that about 3 weeks ago, and I did 40 years of 125 days of speaking, 7 million miles around the world, and I wish I had $10 for every time I was asked that. Lefty Gray and we said the most popular book that was never written was How to Double Haul, and the other one was How to Ride a Bicycle.
Dude, my buddy can fly cast every bit of fly line and go into the backing and on a double haul, and it does not click for me on it, and I don't think it can be taught.
I will send you some stuff. Okay, but I'm going to tell you the key right here. Everybody can see. This is what Lefty used to say. And Lefty was an entertainer. Now, when he wanted to get serious, nobody reads books, the Flycast. Sorry, Mel Krieger and everybody did videos. I did, and the problem is that you need to have somebody there. My daughter is at Shriners, runs a motion detection lab where they take kids and they walk and they see how they're doing, and they look at the motion and they decide if there's anything they can do. So they're the first step to get help. So what we really found out, and I worked a lot with Steve Rajeff, who was the world champion for so many years, and now it's she's 18 or 19 now, girl beating. First time he was ever beaten in the world championship. And but it's all. Here's what Lefty used to do. He'd have the crowd. They'd walk around pointing. It's letting go of the line at the right time. And once you let go of it, it comes out. And if you tie it up here, it has to go up the rod. Okay? Got a rod right. I just looked here. I was just going to put a new tip top on this. So if you take this rod and you come up, and if your hand's here and you pull back and let it go here, so you teach yourself by little pulls. It has nothing to do with hauls. Haul is taking the garbage out. It's a double pull, and forget the double. That's what screws everybody up. Just reach out, let it go. Just start casting and letting it go. So you're shooting some line like this. You let it go, and then pretty soon you start pulling on it, letting it go. Pull on it, letting it go. It's like riding a bicycle. Tell me how you ride a bicycle.
Well, my dad put me on it, had my feet on the pedals, and pushed me down a hill.
Great story about casting. Same thing, and I learned to swim in Missouri. They throw you. See, I can say it either way.
You said
They
it right.
throw you in the water and said, "There you go, sink or swim." So anyway, I was really lucky to have real early in my life get a chance to go to New Zealand and Australia in 1976.
I didn't think you were supposed to say the N-word.
Oh yeah, well I've got that gut out of TV directors. Damn, don't you say the N-word. But anyway,
I watched that. I don't ever prep.
I'm leading into this story, and this is I started first working with Australia, then New Zealand. It just was a luck. We were there in the early days, and I had what would soon become the most successful Hollywood lawyer of all time. He represented Spielberg, and and he had all the money to go, and we could do helicopters. And then, hey, this guy's got magic. Let it help us promote New Zealand. So I did that. But in the early days, I did Australia, and that's when the written word, having a story done, made a difference. Now it's video and talking and all that. So we were sent to northern Australia to see if there was any saltwater fishing could be done for barramundi and Saratoga and queenfish, all kinds of things. And they said, we're sending you up there. And I brought a writer from the U.S., and we went up there to Darwin. Now, this was 1982. It was like an international city you'd see on television, like Casablanca, with all these people running that had gotten pushed out of Cambodia and all the Vietnamese refugees in the place. No paved roads out in the middle of nowhere. And the guy said that head of the commission says, nobody here knows how to fly ships except John Eustace and then another guy. And he said, but we're going to take you to John first. We drove all night, missing water buffalo, out to meet this guy, John Eustace. And so we got out in the morning and got the rods out, and he started casting. Beautiful. Unbelievable. Double hauling, throwing the line out. He says, well, how am I doing? I've never had anybody ever look at my cast. I've never met another fly fisherman. I said, this is a joke, isn't it? He said, no, I've never seen another fly. He pulls up Joe Brooks' complete fly fishing book. There's eight drawings in here. I said, well, how did you do this? He said, well, I just practiced and practiced, and it just sort of came. And then I noticed you pull down the line and start shooting. I said, well, he says, look, if you live out here in the middle of nowhere, he was Kakadu National Park. He was a wildlife biologist. And he said, you'll learn. And we had fabulous fishing. It was great. And he's still alive, and I hear from him all the time. He's in Darwin, and he and the other guy became outdoor writers and things. But, it was a great lesson. Give a man a fly rod, and if you've got a lot of time and you're on a desert island, you can figure out a lot of things.
Yeah, I had a professor, and people that listen to the podcast have heard this before. I had a professor that told me to change my major, which I thought was ironic at the time because it was not a very popular major that I was in. And he was like, you need to go do this because you need to go do philosophy, which is what my degree's in, is in philosophy. He goes,
You're not a
because you're,
preacher. You're supposed to be a
huh?
preacher, aren't you?
My great grandmother wanted me to be a televangelist, which I regret not doing every day of the week because
You've been
I would be,
great.
I would have been rolling in money. And then I could have, the hookers and cocaine would have just come normal, you know.
Ah,
And now all of a sudden I can't put this on stupid simple fly time because I said hookers and cocaine. But I just have to get up and apologize. You know what I mean? I would
yeah.
just have to get up and apologize. That's all I'd have to do.
The world,
But
the world
that's
has
the
changed so much.
hasn't it? I mean, Jim Baker, and who was the old boy who was cousins with Jerry Lee Lewis? Jimmy Swaggart, you know.
Oh,
But no, I have a degree in philosophy. I enjoy understanding history, but I don't care about events. I care about history of thought. And
I like this
so,
history. I have a friend who started out with nothing in Jackson Hole. His name is Tom Ross, and you can look him up. Tom with the THOM. And I have all these sketches. It was sort of like a Frederick Remington story. He would give away. We played baseball. I'd strike a guy out. He'd draw a Heineken's beer bottle with a fly on it.
yeah,
Well, he ended up being one of the top artists in the world,
yeah,
and uh, he loves history, and he does Custer's, and he does it in an Arto Decu style. And you want to look it up, you'll be able to find it. It's history looking through the eye, not exactly the way we look at it. He has like he did one of Billy the Kid dancing. Well, Copeland wrote operas, ballets on Billy the Kid. Now, why did he do that?
yeah.
Yeah, but
Yes.
his whole art is on this wild history. So I tell him, we are about history's a roadmap. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a roadmap to tell you where you're going.
Yeah. And I love the history of way people think, but this professor, he was really good to me. He was a lot better to me than he should have been, but he taught me how to fly fish, but he taught me how to fly fish on extremely small streams. So I had the cast to get my line out there and then just roll cast.
Fine.
And that was all I needed. And on 90% of the rivers in Missouri, that's great. But you asked me to cast more than 30 or 40 feet
That's all right.
because I've
From a
never,
drift boat,
yeah,
that's all you need.
yeah,
And
but I've
and
never,
we fish rivers where you have to sit down because they're so small. And
yeah,
what your kayak is a prime example. You're now my size, which is 5'7". I love all these big guys when they get and sit down the boat. They're little like me, yeah. So but what they learn is not to false cast, and that's what you've got to do: learn to pick it up and make one cast.
yeah,
And I saw Steve Rajeff. I was a host of a Best of the West casting contest for God knows 20 years or so, and uh, they had the best casters come, and when they would come, uh, they had 5 shows, and then it had the end one in Salt Lake. Well, Salt Lake's high, it's a mile high, and Denver always had the longest cast. But they would have this duel, and we would have it on television. It was really quite a deal. And Steve Rajeff threw 2 records, and I watched these guys, were trying to beat him. I did see him get beat once, and the guy quit competitive casting. So this is the time to quit. But anyway, Rajeff threw 128 feet with a 5 weight. And you know how many false casts he made?
none probably. One.
First one back, he threw 90 feet of line. He came forward, back, and shot it. And it went so far, it went out of the pool and into the people that was gathered around. We had to move all the people. And he was on the ground rolling, saying, I did it. I did it. I finally did it. And then he looked up and said, how far did it go?
Yeah.
He knew that he had done it.
Right.
I said, we're still measuring it. He says, I can just tell you it's the best I ever did. Next year, or even beat that. He didn't fall on the floor that day. I think he kind of was a little embarrassed about that. I said, hey, this isn't the NFL. We don't penalize you. So let
And
me ask
that's,
you this. Why do you fly fish?
there's a number of reasons. If you ask one of my friends, he'll say because I like drinking and floating and having fun, and fly fishing doesn't have the stress. Um, a guy that was just on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, he said, somebody asked me why I fish for trout, and I say they don't live in ugly places. Smallmouth bass don't live in ugly places either. I like being outside. I like being on the river. I like being active. Um, when I grew up, I fished with a cane pole and I fished for catfish. Or if I was lucky, I would catch a grasshopper or a toad, which the PETA will eat my lunch for that. But, and throw them on there and catch bass in my grandfather's pond. And conventional fishing, it just never appealed to me. Having used a cane pole until I was probably 16 or 17. And then, using a Zebco 33, it was just, I didn't feel a connection. And when I go out with a fly rod, I get in the kayak and I'm in a kayak with a fly rod. I mean, this is like the least believable thing there is. And I've got 5 buddies who do it with me.
Yeah.
In a very small town, and we're all in a kayak with a fly rod, and everybody looks at us like we're morons. But even if I don't catch the most fish or the biggest fish, I'm practicing my cast, and I tie all my flies for myself and my buddies. I'm the only one of the 5 of us. There's actually 6 of us that use my flies. One of them I have to tie special flies for him to put spinners on for his Zebco 33.
That's all right.
So my friends are like,
Artificial is artificial. I've been a great
yeah.
believer in artificial.
My friends are like, why don't you sell your flies? I'm like, I can't sell them. I can't make any more and feed you guys. I'm like, why don't I charge you? They're like, well, you have so much fun doing it. I'm like, well, when winter hits, I sit here and I tie flies, and that's all I do. I filled up like 5 88 slot fly boxes just to give away at Christmas. And that was before Christmas. That was a month. I had deer season and I had Christmas, and the deer season to Christmas is when I did it.
One of the things I do is work with Project Killing Wild veterans. I've given over 4,000 books and DVDs, had done classes before the pandemic. And one thing they realized after World War II is that the veterans coming back with then, which was called battle fatigue then.
Yeah, or shell shock, maybe. Some of them, that's what they called it.
Tying flies and wrapping rods were way to rewire the brain.
Yeah, I believe it. And I mean, I don't, there's not many things I like more than firing up my wood stove in the middle of winter, getting a couple of big pieces of hard cheese, a nice stout beer, turning on some music, and just tying flies for about 3 hours. That is the most frustrating, relaxing thing you can ever do.
Well, there's amazing things out there. I got to tell you, I've come to the 50th anniversary. I've been involved. Randall Coffin and I both started after I got out of the military, right after the Monterey Pop Festival in August. I was released from my 2 years and sent off to a reserve unit, in which I had to be near Jackson to be able to go to the reserves unit. So I decided, well, rather than go back and try to play baseball, I never could hit I never was a good hitter, a good fielder, and they're a dime a dozen. And being around pros, you know what it takes to be around. It got me through school and the Army. It was
Yeah.
good. It was, the baseball was very, very good to me for that time. And so Randall and I started tying flies, and we met this guy who had more influence on fly fishing than probably anybody that nobody knows. There's always these people that nobody knows
Yeah.
that changes things. His name was Dennis Black, and he sold Tupperware and packed raisins in Fresno, California, and learned to tie under Buzz Busick. And we bought feathers, all of us. We bought from the same place. Randall tied flies, and he used a bubble and a spinning rod. So we all were at this first Federation of Fly Fishing meeting in Jackson Hole in 1967, and I had guided before I went to the military. In the guide operation, they needed guides. There were so many people. So we reached out of the bag, and who do you think I picked but Arnold Gingrich and Lee Wolf? And I got to row them down the river. And that kind of started the professional thing. I went back and said, Randall, we can sell these flies. Lee told us we could do it. And this meeting that we had in this little fly shop, which I eventually ended up buying, called the Rod and Reel. Now it's an Boyer's Indian Arts. From there this guy became the only true millionaire to make it off of fly fishing. Guess what? Nobody ever, well, in today's dollars, but we're talking about becoming a millionaire in the 90s, and this is his company right here. He's the merchants. They're coming up on their 50th anniversary. They have my flies, Randall's fly. Randall, of course, is known for the stimulators. I'm known for the Royal Humpy and Amy's Aunt and other ones. And it's amazing. He put in a program to reward fly tires, like Dave Whitlock, who's very close to you from Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, my grandmother was born in Marshall, Missouri. My other grandmother was born in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Okay. Now, I want to clarify this before anybody gets any further. When I say Yankee, I'm not referring to anything about the Civil War.
Yeah.
I'm only referring to whether or not you like sweet tea, good barbecue, and you say Missouri instead of Missouri.
Okay. I'll give you the Missouri. I'll give you the good barbecue, but I like iced tea.
Sweet iced tea.
No, I like iced tea with lemonade.
Oh, an Arnold Palmer.
Well, guess what? I got to be with Arnold Palmer when he ordered an Arnold Palmer. Right back here, just so you know I'm not BSing you. I don't have it up. I got my American Sportsman stuff up there. But I have we did a golf course together in Jackson, and we did a fly fishing stream and lake, and he did the golf course. I made 50 grand. He made a couple million. But we had a casting deal there, like golf, for 35 years. And so these waitresses, when it opened, he went in there and said, I want an Arnold Palmer. And they looked at him like they didn't know who the hell he even was. What's an Arnold Palmer? And Kurt Gowdy was there. The grand opening was wonderful. 1986, we had Palmer. We had Art Linkletter. That goes really back.
Yes.
Phil Harris, Kurt Gowdy. Oh, man, I can't remember all the people, but it was a huge opening. And my job was in an hour to get Arnold Palmer a fish out of his pool. And that's the one I usually have. My wife repainted this room, and I haven't put the stuff up. And so anyway, I was really lucky because I met my father was a pilot after the war for movie companies, and that's how he met my mother. He was RCA pilot, so he had a lot of Hollywood contacts. So I grew up around people, and then being in Jackson and meeting the right people, I was just really blessed to be around a lot of well-known people. And I really have to say, look, it's just name throwing out doesn't mean a hill of beans. It's what you learn from those people. Like I tell people, and they go, "Oh yeah, I gave Harrison Ford his first flying lesson." Well, he crashed. I said he survived. My father was a test pilot that had 13 accidents and walked away. He says any landing you walk away from is a good one. And Harrison knew my dad, and we were on a fishing trip, and I was flying the second seat because they didn't have an extra pilot. And with my family flying, my son has a PhD in aerospace engineering. You fly. That's what you do. I didn't want to do it. But anyway, so he said, if you can do it, I can do it. And he came up to my grandson and says, this is a guy who got me in all this trouble. My grandson finally believed that I gave him that lesson, but also gave him fly fishing lessons too. And he bought a beautiful ranch. We went out. I hate horses. He made me ride horses to see his place. They don't like me. I don't like them.
I had a horse. My grandfather got us kids a horse, but it was this old surly quarter horse. And I ride motorcycles because they don't have a brain. Horses will drag you on barbed wire, on trees.
Oh,
I am
well,
not a horse fan.
we did a program for Wyoming called Jack's Secret Wyoming. We filmed it in the age where it was moving over to HD, and we filmed it for the state, 13 episodes, not in HD. And then the networks all changed to HD.
Yeah.
So they ended up editing it down, putting it on YouTube many years ago. But one of the episodes they made me do was a pack trip. And the guy that filmed it, which I had a lifetime, we started filming since 1988, and he filmed a lot of my videos. And he did hunting shows. And his father was a horse racer in Wisconsin. Oh, don't worry. And the guy who was doing it was a former guide of mine. You'll be fine. It's a kid's horse. This is on film. I get on the film. The horse turns around and bites me in the leg.
Was the horse's name Dudley?
I don't know, but he kind of got used to it. I did it. I haven't been on a horse since.
And my daughter, one of my daughters, I have two daughters. All three of my daughters, their favorite saying is everybody's country until time comes to do country shit. But their grandfather has it's a hobby farm. He's got 25
right.
head of cattle. He's got a couple of pigs to fatten up. He's got probably 40, 50 chickens, a big coop and everything else. And he just futzes around on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they all have their rubber boots and they get in and they slop the hogs when we've got the hogs. They feed the chickens. They get the eggs. They do all that. And my one daughter's like, I want a horse. And I'm like, no. She's like, well, we've got 100 and some odd acres up there. I want a horse. And I'm like, no, I'll buy you a motorcycle. I'm not getting you a horse.
My wife was an ER nurse. There were no motorcycles. There were no horses. What happened is they would keep records in the ER in Jackson, and the horses would win every time. And the motorcycles were right up there too.
Well, you know why motorcycle riders are such great organ donors.
Yeah, well, the kids got to see a fatal accident in front of them, so that nobody's ever been. Of course, now the grandson is a national Lance Armstrong biker, which is about as dangerous as riding a horse.
Yeah,
and the other one's a freestyle skier trying to make the Olympic team, which is head injury central. This by her mother, who does research on head injuries.
Yeah, and then you ask me why I fly fish. It's a lot safer.
Yes. Well, let me tell you, we had a woman fall on a taken down fly rod. She tripped and went through her eye, through her brain.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, she survived for about 5 or 6 years and problems. So
What
don't
was
let
her
yourself think
personality like?
you never want to break a fly rod down and start walking with it.
You know, you
Now,
always leave your
it
fly
was a
rod.
4-piece. Brand will remain anonymous.
Yeah.
He tripped on Flat Creek, helicopter to Idaho Falls, which is where they had a neurology center. She was the luckiest person on earth. It just went right through, but she ended up passing away after coming back from an African trip, dying on the plane with blood aneurysm. You know, there's so many bad things that can happen to you. You know,
Yeah. My thing is, like, I'll keep my, depending on what river I'm on in the kayak, I'll keep like if I'm taking my spinning reel, I'm taking it. And if I've got my fly rod, if I'm going through a lot of rapids and then I know I'm going to be able to fly fish, because some of the rivers we hit, you go through class 2 rapids and then you hit these nice, big, deep, beautiful pools. And I keep my fly rod in the tube. But when I'm walking, I've always been told if you're walking in front to carry your fly rod pointed backwards. And if the guy behind you has his pointed forwards, that way the two of you are far enough apart that nobody can break the other one's fly rod. If one falls, you have time to stop. And I always thought that was an ingenious way to walk through the woods when you're going to a different hole that maybe you can't wade down to or whatever, but it's literally tip to butt. You know what I mean? You've got one tip coming back and the other one, and you're far enough apart. You guys can do all the stuff, and when you're alone, I carry mine backwards so I don't grab anything with it before I go through it. And I could not imagine carrying it broken down because that's a lot of a
it was
broken down fly rod.
it was a freak thing. Freak
Yeah,
thing.
but I mean, that's a lot of material coming at your head,
Well, you
when
know,
you think about it.
let me talk about this kayak. So I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful. A person with a kayak, especially, I know that there's a lot of brands out there. I had a friend that worked with one of the top brands out in California, and I know it's
Oh,
kind of
Hobie?
a Hobie, yeah. And Von Chenard got really into that.
Yep.
He was a surfer, and he would take it down to fish even tarpon with him.
Well,
We'd go
wasn't
down.
Hobie started as a surfboard company?
Yeah, I think so. I'm look. All I know is what my friends do. Body surfing was dangerous enough, and I did that, and my kids did that, and we're still alive to talk about it.
Yep.
But the thing is, a moving boat is a challenge. Whether it's a raft, there's fabulous inflatable rafts now. I help a company called Flycraft, which are on the internet a lot.
Yeah. And
And
I've secretly dreaming about them to sponsor the show so that I can get one.
well, they're so far behind in this pandemic, it's unbelievable.
I'll wait if they'll give it to me.
Well, you talk to them. But let me tell you, I have one, and I did my last guided trip with it. The water was so low in October. But what you don't want to do is get in these uh, pontoon boats with flippers and go down rivers.
No.
They're for lakes or big wide rivers like the Missouri, with up in Montana, but
Mm-hmm.
not fast streams. I have seen, and it's really hard. What happens, and when you're low like that, you have trouble hooking things because you're so low. And when you put in the pontoon boat and you're trying to hook something, you're trying to, and a kayak, it stays because it's aerodynamic, where the pontoon boats are great for rapids, but they're not going to keep you stable.
And
I think it's a wonderful addition to our fishing.
I'm not going to talk smack on any of my sponsors because I don't have a kayak sponsor.
You should. You should.
I should have a kayak sponsor. Eric Jackson was on the show when he was with Jackson Kayak, and then he was on the show with the new Apex Kayak.
Mhm.
But I don't see him giving me a $15,000 carbon fiber kayak, which I would love to see him do that. But
Well, there were
um,
days. I got
yeah,
drift boats and I got, but those days are long gone. There's too many people in the business. And, uh, I've watched it. The river runs through ain't a boast, but really the problem is fly fishing. To really get into it, it's as hard as golf or any other sport. And the
it is.
insects and matching the thing, if you get into it, you're literally looking PhD. I mean, to really get up to the high level,
Yeah.
a lot of people, if you've got the money, it's easy just to hire a guide, go to the White River, go to anywhere, and a moderate listened person can catch fish. But that doesn't make you a fly fisherman is dropping you in somewhere you've never been with fly boxes and say, go fishing. How are you going to approach it? I had
I'm
a
gonna.
friend that probably did 400 fly fishing uh, guided trips, and he didn't feel comfortable going fishing on his own without a guide.
Well, I'm gonna say this. I mean, Missouri's a show me state. We're stubborn headed. Um, I have rivers and streams that I would not take food and do a 3-day, 4-day camping trip because I know what I'm doing. There are other places I've been that's not happening. I think a lot of it is knowing where you're going. Um, Fly rods now, and I'm going to go ahead and plug Pablo real quick with Bajuco Flats. He's one of our sponsors. Pablo makes. I've got a one weight. I caught a 3-pound catfish on the other day. Um, hell of a fight.
Hmm.
Great time. He makes a really great fly rod and always built to order just the way you want it, but he makes them from size 1 up to saltwaters. And he builds them on 4 or 5 different blanks, from glass to TFO to whatever. And I'm a TFO guy. I use TFO fly rods. I like TFO blanks from Pablo just because of the warranty, because I know I'm sloppy and I'm going to break something.
Well,
Um,
the secret about fly rods?
you find the action and the speed that suits your
Yeah,
cast.
but let's just talk about fly rods for a second. Now,
Okay.
I'm going to, you know, you get these actors on. Let me just tell you the secret. Tom, Tom Cruise is 5'7".
He's that short?
Yeah, look
I
it
could
up.
put him in my
Watch,
pocket.
see the picture of him and Nicole Kidman.
I could put him in my
Uh,
pocket.
Harrison's about 5'10".
Really?
Uh, Paul Newman, uh, uh, Robert Redford's 5'7". He and I are exactly the same height.
You're
It's
that short?
illusions. Now, let me just tell you about the fly rod business. First of all, TFO, one of my employees, left and went to Texas and worked away to be one of the owners of TFO, and he sold out a number of years ago.
I didn't know that. I like
And
their rods.
Brandon Powers was his name, wonderful guy. The owner of TFO is going to be around. His family is going to be around, and that's the key to a fly. There's only one company, St. Croix, that's family owned. The rest of them are all owned by, which is good, because a fly rod company is like a boat. It's a way to throw money into it. It's a hole to suck up money,
Okay.
and it all happened because Orvis offered a 25-year warranty to try to capture the whole fly rod business. And so everybody else reacted to give lifetime warranties.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realized they could take the mandrels to overseas. The mandrels cost a lot of money to make, to roll. And they're a metal tube and it's wrapped around it and they're designed. And you make them one time, and if you screw it up, boom. And every time you make a glass rod or graphite rod, you're going to have ones you just have to throw away. So that's part of the expense because they just don't come out right. They're like baking. Not every cake comes out right. Not every king rod can. But all the companies are all owned by people that are substantial. When you buy a rod, you want to make sure that company's going to be around. And when you buy a custom rod, you want to make sure it's from a TFO
Yeah.
because they're going to be around. They're going to be around.
Yeah.
And Orvis is going to be around. Uh, guess who owns Loomis? Ever heard of Seiko?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and you go around, Winston, guy bought it when he was 28, has a home in Jackson Hole. Uh, the Sage is owned by the Green Foundation. They own the Seattle Seahawks.
I have casted a sage rod, and like I said, I've casted a sage rod. It was way too fast for my cast.
Well, let me tell you that all the rod. Look, you can hardly buy a bad rod anymore.
I know,
I mean, they're
but
making them so good. If you know, it's a matter of what you pride. And having a custom made rod with your name on it means a lot. You pass that on, and there's nothing wrong with having a blank rod, but you get the good blank. And you know, it's like golf clubs. You know, I've seen some of the best golfers in the world take two irons and beat the pants off of anybody.
yeah,
It's
well,
knowing how to do it.
that's what Pablo was. You still get the same warranty with his TFOs
Right.
as you get from TFO.
Yeah, but you
You
get a
know,
custom wrap and you get the handle the
yeah,
way you want it, and you get the real
yeah,
thing the way you
and
want
it's still at MSRP. And a TFO at MSRP is a great value,
it.
in my opinion.
My daughter has. I mean, she can have any ride. I have my own contract with Berkheimer, who makes probably the most expensive rod. They're about $900. You can't make them fast enough.
Yeah.
But you know, and he understands that I definitely promote lower price rods because everybody can't afford a $900 rod. But he worked his way up to that point, making rod blanks for people.
Yeah.
And for all the big companies could not make rod blanks fast enough during that '90s push after the movie, and then of course it slid.
Isn't that, I mean, to bring this full circle, I asked you because I'd heard you talk about, and I don't do show prep. This was the first show I ever did real show prep for. And I listened to I think it was your grandfather made the comment about the Jesus' disciples are fly fishermen.
Yeah.
And then you're making the joke about Norm McLean making it dry fly, Paul being a dry fly fisherman. But
Well, we're
my
Catholic. I
dad,
mean, my God, it's got to be Paul. Come on now.
yeah,
You're
well,
Episcopal and Catholic. It's got to be Paul.
yeah. And so my dad, who hated fishing, my dad and I would go fishing, and he would hand me a 22 Beretta, and he would flip a cigarette in the water, hand me the gun, and say, "Shoot it across the water to the bank." That's the fishing poles never left the back of the truck. My dad was an NRA rifle instructor, handgun instructor. I mean, my dad knew everything there was to know about cars, guns, and women. I mean, that was, not to be ornery, but that was his forte. He was a flirt. He had drank a lot before he had me, and he just absolutely loved guns and firearms. I mean, he was a hell of a guy. And he watched her overruns through it, and he saw what you were talking about Norman seeing. Fly fishing meant nothing to my father.
Did you know that his brother died in Missouri
Missouri?
or Missouri?
I
I
did
go
not know
back and
that.
forth. You know, it depends on how much I think about it. But no, Norman, like anything, the real life sometimes doesn't make good fiction. Sometimes
Right.
it makes better fiction. You know, as
Yes.
a English teacher, you know
Yeah.
that. And
There are great stories, and there are stories that need salt.
yeah, it's much better that he died in the gambling deal. I don't know all the details. Norman would talk about it, but he never the drink never really left him, and that was the problem. And he just couldn't understand why his father idolized him. And that we talked about that a lot. But you know what? You always talk about it. Everybody I know had some kind of family issue, and as my wife said, just get over it.
Yeah. But what I thought was so funny was what my dad saw in that movie was what Norm wrote about.
Yep.
Now, what the movie, the short story that I love that speaks to me was, remember the short story he wrote that had to do with the pimp?
Yep.
Oh, that is like my favorite short story of all time.
Did you read the one about the four? His book about it was a nonfiction book about a forest fire in Montana.
No, I
Uh,
didn't read that
you
one.
want to
I've
read
read
that?
his fiction. I've never read his nonfiction.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think what the name of it is, but people can find it. It's considered a masterpiece
Yeah.
to that genre of people.
Yeah.
And what Norman in that trilogy, he had one on forest fire that's really really good too. If anybody wants to go out, try to find that book. It's done University of Chicago Press,
Yeah.
and then of
It
course
was,
released on paperback after the movie. But the
but
story's in there, which is
there
has the
was
one that you're
the,
talking about.
there was a river runs through it, the fire, the cook on the hole in the sky, and then there was
Right.
another one that was about him with the pimp.
Yep. And that I think took place in St. Louis,
It was hilarious.
and I think
And,
from what he told
I
me,
mean,
it might have happened after his brother's death.
yeah. And, I'm not having you on the show to talk about Norm. Um, but anyway, bringing it full circle, my dad was a guy who, um, I don't know how to say this. I guess the only way I can say it is like he was very in the moment. And when we shot competition handgun, we would have what we called a Zen-like moment. There was a book based off of the Seven Swords that a guy had rewritten and related to handgun competition, where you are in the moment and you see the targets and you do these things. And then fly fishing, there's sometimes when when you release that cast, that fish is going to be there. That cast before it lands, the tippet's not going to mess up. The fly's going to land right. And if you're chucking a streamer, before it gets 6 inches down, you're going to have a fish. And you just have that moment where you're connected to whatever deity you believe in. You're connected to nature. You're connected to everything. And the only thing between you is a little bit of line and a scrawny stick to help not break it off.
Well, that's you know the thing about what I think is important about fly fishing is the literature. People don't realize. If you think of all the sports on earth, I want you to think about baseball, football, soccer. If you added all of them up, golf, fly fishing has 10 times more many books.
Oh, well, we're sitting here talking about fly fishing out of a kayak on this podcast. I mean, how much more of a niche market can you get, man?
Well,
I mean, there's so many books written on it, and there's not on other things. There's something about it. It's almost when you're standing there on the stream and the mist is coming off and you're casting that fly, in my opinion, and this may be a little awkward, but in my opinion, it's just being one with nature.
well, the best
You're
person that I ever was, obviously beyond Norman, but I got a chance. I have memorabilia stacked in the things, but getting to meet Robert Traver and who his name was John Volcker was his name. He was a Supreme Court justice. But the movie Anatomy of a Murder, it was a portrayal of him trying his first murder case,
Mm.
and eventually he wrote the book Anatomy of a Trout and articles. I have the ones in the original Trout magazine where he first published in 1972, and of course he if anybody wants to read and quotes and stuff, uh, he did it in a way that the average person can understand it, where a river runs through it, and beneath the rocks are the words.
Yeah, it's a deep
Spoken
metaphor.
said, it's whiskey in a tin cup,
Yeah.
and there's so many other things. It's so equally unimportant, but not nearly as fun. What a what a great line! It's like the lines from Ecclesiastic. Great written lines. Short but to the point.
Yeah.
You can learn everything about fly fishing in that little 3 paragraph, which is it's not about the fish. And here's the interesting thing: my kids all wrote me the same one, and I've never showed it to each one. Each one think they wrote this letter, which was, "Thank you, Dad, for supporting us in college." And they do the quote from uh, oh gosh, the quote from Theodore. No, that God, it gets it. Sorry, you're at my time when I start losing my memory. Uh, but what it is, it's not the fish that you see. Uh, and they wrote it. It's not the trout, the fish you go after, but it's the experience.
Right.
And I have it wrong. I should know it by now, but they both wrote the quote independently, and they both think, and I got both of them in a file. When I pass away, they'll get to see they wrote the same thing. They got what fishing was about, which
Yeah.
is not the fish you're after.
No, it's about being out there. I love Thoreau. I understand what a hypocrite he was, but I love Thoreau just because of what he he
Thank you
believed
for
in.
doing that. You know the quote. It's not the fish. Look,
Uh,
you're having me on too late. I got one tomorrow. It's at 10 o'clock. I'm not very coherent at 10 o'clock in the morning either. You know, yeah. The
it,
good thing, this isn't a jazz night. I'm a really really avid basketball fan because
oh, I'm sorry. Well,
yeah,
Jack,
yeah,
I'm gonna ask you one last question, and I'm gonna give you a teaser because I'm gonna ask you back on.
yeah. I'd be happy
Okay.
to. I enjoy
So,
talking to you. Enjoy somebody that talks the same language.
well, Missouri Ease, is that what
Yeah. Yes.
can you get Pacific? Can you get Pacific with me on what your favorite movie is?
My favorite movie?
Yeah, can you be
Oh yeah,
Pacific on
easy,
what your favorite?
easy. Lawrence of Arabia.
Really?
I love when he picks up the sand. What do I like about the desert? See if you can figure. What do I like about? It's the greatest performance, in my opinion, of all time.
Ah,
And
now
but
I'm gonna.
I got to leave it. Okay, that's a movie, but I can tell you from Anatomy of a Murder, and that. So I asked. I'd done a Trout Unlimited program with the guy that founded Trout Unlimited and Volker and Robert Traver. And he said, let me take you out for a drink. He was a big drinker. And he said, I don't have many friends left. I've kind of drunk my life away. And he says, well, I want to get a book. I didn't bring any books. We were in Grayland, Michigan. We're doing this thing. So we went into a Barnes and Noble and asked him to look up anything they might have from him. And of course, the person didn't even know who was standing there, and they had one book, a paperback. And he says, well, gosh, you don't have Anatomy of a Murder? She's never heard of it. The greatest true mystery written as fiction. Anyway, I said, God, how does it feel to have Jimmy Stewart play you? You know what he said?
Hmm.
He said, Jimmy Stewart played me better than I played me. I was a miserable drunk. I offended people. Only good thing to do is I wrote a few good books and obeyed the law and helped people.
He sounds like
Jimmy
Bukowski.
Stewart played me better. And when you said the movies, yeah, and Apocalypse Now would be second. I can name
Man,
all the, Harrison and I used to do that all the time. We agreed on one that you wouldn't have never known about. It's called The Wind and the Lion.
no, I would have, when you said something I wouldn't have heard about, I thought you were going to go straight to American Graffiti
Oh
with
no, I
Harrison.
mean I saw that and that was great. It was from my
That
time
was
period.
like Harrison's first movie. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
awesome.
He tried movies and it didn't work, and he became a carpenter.
Yeah, and then
And
they hired him for American Graffiti, and
no,
then
no,
they
he was already an actor from that. He'd come
I
from.
thought they
No, his father was a voice announcer from Chicago.
but I thought he was a construction worker
He
on
was
set
no, it was
for
after.
American Graffiti.
No, it was after American Graffiti. He had done another one with the guy where on a mule. I can't think of what that. But he did a couple of duds. He did a war movie, and he just wasn't getting anywhere.
Well,
And so he
Kate
started.
Capshaw,
Uh,
Kate Capshaw is from like 7 miles from my house.
oh yeah, Kate.
She grew up in Chaffee, Missouri.
Yeah, I've never met her, but she's married to Spielberg, and she.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she was.
And they will occasionally come here of all places for Christmas.
Yeah, well, uh, my attorney friend Skip is their lawyer. But anyway, getting back to Harrison, so he became a carpenter, and he was doing Sergio Mendez's back porch, and he met.
The spaghetti
Yeah,
western.
yeah, and I started doing American sportsman shows in '68 with Kurt Gowdy, and the sound man was a guy that was a friend of Harrison's, and he uh, was a sound guy, and he moved to Jackson, and we became friends. And he told the guy that did Star Wars, not Spielberg,
George.
and he told him about Harrison, and they were looking for somebody to play Han Solo, and he came out of the and he was happy doing the carpentry. He'd probably been happy staying with that. And he always thought that 50 people could have been Indiana Jones. He got it because Tom Selleck turned down the role.
Yeah, and can you believe that Tom
Well,
Selleck turned it down?
I took Tom fishing, and this was again part of. And Tom said, "Yeah, it was the dumbest thing I ever did, but I couldn't get out of the contract." And the guy that was the producer was in the boat with him when he said that.
Oh
He was
my
the
god!
producer of the what it was, a Y50. What was that one? No,
Oh,
yeah,
Ma-
and
Magnum PI was like my favorite show ever growing up. Like it was like
he is the
Magnum PI
nicest.
and then maybe the A Team, but I never missed Magnum
Well, he
PI.
is as nice a guy as you ever want to be. He is just like he comes across on TV. Uh, I remember we were on the Green River in Utah, and Don Johnson was one room, and nobody cared but they wanted to bug all the girls were trying to bug Tom, and I was trying to keep him away. He says, "Look, I'll stay up." I was young then. I was like in my 30s. I could stay up all night. And he goes, "Wait a minute." He says, "Let me show you how it's done." "Hey, young lady, come over here. You know who I am?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Look, would you and your girlfriend stay by the door and tell people I really need my sleep? I'm doing a big photo shoot tomorrow. And would you do that?" And she says, "Yeah." I said, "Go to bed." And by the way, I've taken flies out of Don Johnson, out of Spider Savage, who was a skier that got killed. Uh, I have a whole list of people. Don Johnson says, "I don't want to go to the hospital. What will you do if you can keep me out of the hospital?" And I said, well, I'll pull it out, but you got to have dinner with my daughters. And so I imagine pulling a fly out of Tom Selleck's face. And I remember I pulled a big old kiwi muddler out of uh, uh, out of the face, and like, don't pull too hard. They're not that good at. We got it out, but anyway, uh, I pulled one out of a governor of Wyoming, and then he said, "You remember that fly you pulled out? Stopped the sale of this land, and we ended up getting 3.5 miles of river." Favors, you got to remember that favors are all things. When you do something, you say, I'm not charging you for any of this.
Asking you for a favor.
And I'll tell it to your sponsors. You get a dedicated person. And I always used to I was Cortland, I did all the thing companies, and they all said, well, how do we know you're doing your job? I said, well, are your sales up? Yeah. I guess I'm doing my job. There's no way of really, understanding. Every person you meet, you talk to, you tell them something, you don't know where it's going to go.
We've got this little tiny podcast, and I mean, we're trying to grow everything, but there are guys that are, I'm a school teacher. I'm not I don't have a website.
You got to understand, all the fly fishermen before us, before Kaufman and I and Whitlock, everybody had other jobs. Yeah. Sweeber was an architect. Whitlock was an artist with Phillips 66 in Oklahoma. Every one of those people, all those great names you saw from 100 years ago were lawyers, professors, all were things. There were no such thing as in the movie. That wasn't even in the book. I talked Norman into do it, which it says, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a professional fly fisherman.
Yeah.
And the kid rolls back and says, there is no such thing.
Yeah.
That was my little joke.
Yeah, there wasn't.
Go find it in the book.
Yeah.
And the reason is there is now. There's guides, and there always was. They were the only true guys, and they were ski instructors in the winter, or most of them school teachers. But literally, all those famous shops in West Yellowstone and Montana were all run by school teachers because you used to have 3 months off.
Well, I still do.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I do. I'm lucky enough that I still do. And I've been thinking about a lot of different things. As far as guiding, I'm honestly thinking about, I've got a guy who was on the podcast who builds boats, and I'm thinking about having him build me one. Calling it a hardcore favor.
Well, can I make a suggestion? Go on a guided fishing trip in Wyoming or Montana and see what they do and say, is this something I want to do?
I've got a kid who, if he hadn't been homeschooled, would have been my student, is a fishing guide in Alaska. And he's going to take me on a guided trip in Arkansas this year on the White.
Well, I got to tell you, you were talking about double hauling.
Yeah.
When I first went to New Zealand, I was young and the book was out and there's a big head over there. And I went up this stream with a farmer and he was a farmer guide. And that time in the country, there was no fishing lodges. There were like 6 guides in the whole country. And this guy, was a farmer and he guided on the stream. I walked up, didn't catch anything. He said, well, you want me to show you how to catch fish in New Zealand? So I begrudgingly went up and he taught me. He said, so I ran into him about 5 or 6 years later at the World Fly Fishing Championship. And he says, hey, I was your guide. He says, I remember. And he says, yeah, I had that kid, that Steve Rajeff. Yeah, I took him out and we took him on Lake Rotorua. And he was casting out and he was casting 80, 90 feet. I've never seen anybody cast line like that. He was 18. And he said he was a world champion. And I said, well, buddy, here's the problem. The fish are like right here. And he says, I really haven't been fishing. I just learned to cast at the Golden Gate Casting Club. And So Tony Hayes, who was a guide at the Tongariro Lodge and owned the Tongariro Lodge, said, "You know what you need to do, Steve, is go guide in Alaska. You'll learn how to fish." And that's what he did, and that's how he's an absolute world-class fisherman. But see, the New Zealand guides used to go to Alaska to guide because of reverse seasons.
Yep. And Andrew Montgomery, who's been on the show, a great kid, and I'm going to call him a kid because, he would have been my student if he hadn't been homeschooled. Great kid. He's a guide in Alaska, and he and I are going to go on a couple of fishing trips this summer. Hopefully, but when Alaska opens up and school gets out, hopefully we've got a week on the end. And
Well, you
I
need to
mean,
go there. You need to brighten your
yeah,
thing and take. If I can make a suggestion, uh, one of the things that's really good is more you get out where you can get, you can get the viewership another way and get the advertising from that. For having your sponsors, but really good, sharp, like YouTube and stuff like that. You got to get the viewers up.
yeah,
But
and I mean, we're still live on the air, so I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that, but we're giving away 3 of your books and 3 leaders tonight, and what I want you to do is to let us know, let Jack know what you thought was the most interesting thing he said. If you're listening to
But
this,
my daughter could write that up. Too much. I was told tonight you talk too much.
if you're
But
listening to the podcast, if you're listening to us on the normal podcast, go to YouTube, get on Kayak Flyer. It'll be Jack Dennis with Kayak Flyers, what I'm going to name it. Leave a comment. If you're watching on Facebook, click the link and go over to the YouTube channel.
okay,
If you're on Instagram, check us out. But
let
we've
me
got
leave you
3
with
books and 3
10
leaders.
things to make your fishing better.
All right.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right. First of all, first tip, you can't get enough casting. Like basketball, you do layups, you do batting practice. In fly fishing, you go out 30 feet, put the line under your finger, and you put 15 minutes of hitting that hat with a 30-foot cast with no false cast. That will teach you the stroke. And from then on, casting is the number one thing. Second, good fly lines. Make sure they're clean. Make sure you replace them like a fishing license. 3 is make sure you have good leaders. Drawn right. I know you have a leader sponsor. It's hard again to get bad leaders, but have a leader you trust and understand that breaking a fly off in a fish is a good thing, not a bad thing. That's 4 is learn how to buy flies. And that is you need more sizes than you do patterns. 20 patterns will get you around the world. Anywhere, and I've fished every continent except Antarctica. And if there was fishing in Antarctica, I would have been there. I've been on the tips, I've been everywhere. The only place I haven't been is India, and I just don't have a desire. I have friends that go there, but I've fished in Bhutan, you name it, I've been there.
India's kind of rough from what I understand.
But let's talk about, you want to have caddis, mayflies, you want to have emergers, you want to have nymphs. But that's one of the things you can get off. Don't go crazy on having so many flies. Just have many sizes. Adam's parachute, Adam's parawolf, and you need to have it from 18 to size 8, and that will match about 80% of the hatches in the world, that color.
Well, didn't I hear you say that there were only a couple of flies you actually needed?
Well, I actually, you want to have a Clouser minnow. Bob Clouser did a wonder for that. Woolly buggers. You want to have a pheasant tail nymph, and again, sizes 8 through that. You want to have an elk hair caddis, because caddis, but a 16 brown elk hair caddis will match 90% of the pale morning dun hatches. You need a good blue wing olive one. You need a hair wing so you can see it. You need to learn how to fish 2 flies, not because you have two opportunities, because you can fish the hatch better. A dry on the surface, a nymph under the other one.
I'm a hopper dropper fan.
And one of the best things you can do is observe. I want you to go to okay, this is number 6. Go to your stream, take a video camera, or your phone now. You don't need a video camera. And video the fish. Get high on a bluff. Watch how they react to fishermen. One of the best places on earth to do that is the Green River in Utah. You can get above, you can see all the fish, how there'll be like 100 boats go down. You'll see how they react. You'll see every fisherman from the worst to the best. You learn by observation. My wife told the lady I gave private lessons, I learned from watching my husband. He can't tell me anything. I watched him and I learned. Observe. Observation. Before you fish a stream, this is 7. Walk up and down. Look at the bank. Look what insects are along the bank. Look what's in the trees. Watch the water. At least walk a quarter mile upstream, quarter mile downstream. Look and be patient. Okay? Next, always have a backup rod. I've heard more people go, oh my God, I broke my rod. We used to do that in helicopters. Get out. I'll never forget this. Getting out of a helicopter, and they tell you to keep the tip down. The guy I was with broke the tip. He got the rod. I got to watch all day. I always carry a rod, and you know if you can afford extra rods, but you can buy them accordingly. 8 weights are great for ocean. You need 2 rods, 8 weight and a 5 weight. And you can put different lines on those. You can have it. I fish a 3 weight. But if you can only afford 2 rods, you want to have a 5 weight. Or it could be a 6 weight. But nowadays, 6 weights or 5 weight, they've overdone the rods. So then you got an 8 weight. That'll fish Alaska. That'll fish bonefish. It won't catch tarpon, but not many people are going to get a chance to fish tarpon. Okay, now we're going down to 9. 9 is don't get caught up in all this hoopla. Yeah. It is not a competition, even though I founded the Jackson Hole One Fly, but guess what? Nobody wins any money. Money changes everything.
Uh-huh.
Look at bass tournaments.
Yes.
Fly fishing has never been able to do that. We just gave away $350,000 to streaming projects, our 35th year. 10 is join Trout Unlimited or any organization and go to a club where you can talk, as you would call it, talk fishing shit, and not have to have them look at you like you're from another planet. Get involved with the club, go help a stream, and don't teach your buddy how to fish. You know how I sold the number 1 selling video in fly fishing was Cabela's getting started fly fishing. So they said, Jack, just make it. Okay, so I made it, filmed a lot of it myself. I had a few stuff. I edited it during my 30th wedding anniversary, which almost got me divorced. Everybody else was out on the surf, and I'm editing this thing for Cabela's. And so I gave it to the guy, and he says, okay. I said, aren't you going to look at it? He says, no, I'm giving it to my friend. Then I'm taking fishing on Cabela's private stream they have in northern Nebraska. He didn't have to teach him anything. He got there. It's just unbelievable. The guy fished. He caught some fish. 150,000 DVDs later. I only made a couple bucks, but the DVD, it wasn't we learned that, you'd buy a video that was $8 or $9 compared to one that was $25 at the time.
Well, the proof is in the pudding on that. Jack.
So anyway, that's my 10 tips. And I love, if I could tell you how many people I saw that were starting out like you, and guides and people. And one thing I was good at is picking people. Another thing Rick is good at Oasis is picking people. If Rick said you're a good guy, you're a good guy to me. And remember more than anything is to give a guy a job and let him do it.
That means a lot to me. And I'm gonna have you back on the show if you're willing to come back
Oh,
on.
yeah.
And I'd like to have you and Rick on.
Yeah, I'll tell you another person too. We'll talk. I have all kinds of people. Let me think on
Yeah,
that.
but
I'd love to do it with Rick. Rick is, and
oh,
then we can talk music a little bit with him.
well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking like one of my first days off from it'll be the end of May, beginning of June. We can do a daytime video where
Well,
everybody's
we'll do something. I have a little private water. We can do a little warm water session. If we can do it
ooh,
out on the thing, and I can show people how to catch panfish with a fly.
yeah, and I may be coming to North Carolina this summer.
Yeah, I'm in Chapel Hill.
I'm looking at Top Sail. How
I have
far is
no
that?
idea.
It's on the Outer Banks.
Oh yeah. Well, I just met a guy from we moved here in 2019, and I had to go, before the pandemic came out in March, we watched one of the national races in Atlanta and got home to a shut down economy.
So
I
how far
went,
are you from Atlanta?
oh, 5 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. I
How
mean,
far
yeah.
is how far are you from Chattanooga?
Uh, let's see, probably I don't know, 4 hour,
No,
it's
it'd
three and a
be
half hours to
three.
Asheville, and then you go up over into Tennessee.
Well, I'm going into vacation to Chattanooga, which is like a mile from. It's like 30 or no, maybe more
I
than
don't,
30
and
miles.
I haven't had any time.
I'll have to look at. I'll have to look at it. But I'm coming out. I'm supposed to come out and go fishing with Chris Ellis this summer, and my wife wants to go on vacation down to Chattanooga, and we may be able to get together.
Well, it all depends. I'll be gone a
Yeah,
little in July and a
yeah,
little probably here most of August, and then the one flies in September.
yeah.
Then I got
Well,
Fly Tackle Dealer Show in October and hunting with the grandson.
yeah, we'll have to look at it. But I'm
Look,
gonna tell you what.
anyway, it's been a pleasure. We probably put everybody to sleep, and that's just fine. My wife likes to stay up. She spent a whole lifetime getting up at 4:30 in the morning, so she doesn't do that anymore. And I spent a whole lifetime being up till 1 in the morning. So there
Jack,
you
I don't
are.
know what to say. This has been amazing. I really want to have you back on here, get you in here with Rick and some of the other guys that you know. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
these are stories that we're not getting. I mean, these aren't the same stories that you get interviewed normally, and that's what I like. I like to sit down and talk to people and talk to them, not talk about their reputations. And I cannot thank you enough.
It's about people. It isn't about, you know, everybody likes to sling names down, but I actually had experiences. One of the greatest experiences of my life was spending time with Richard Pryor after he was diagnosed with MS. And we
Oh
went
Lord.
fishing, and he was so cold. It was like 85 degrees, and he was so cold because of his burned skin. But oh man, I had quite a history. I set him up with a trip to Australia. Oh, he ended up having a heart attack. You don't want to know. But he was the most thoughtful person. And both he and Robin Williams were not funny as a regular person.
No.
Uh,
I can imagine there was I've researched some of this a little bit, and it's you have an on-air personality and you have an off-air personality.
well, let me tell you about Robin Williams because this is probably one of my absolute greatest stories of all time. So I'm doing the British Columbia Sportsman Show, and this is when he was doing Mrs. Doubtfire, and they filmed it in Vancouver. And he was staying at the same hotel I was, right across from BC Place. And uh, his manager stopped me in the hall and said, "Hey, are you the guy over the thing?" And says, "Robin saw you, and he needs a casting lesson on how to throw a shooting teeny tip because he's going to Alaska and he hasn't done that before. Would you mind giving him a lesson tomorrow? We have a late call." And I said, "Sure." He comes before the show starts. Be happy to. And so we got down there, we met there, and there's this long pool, in the side the BC, which is a football stadium, and indoors. And so I'm showing him he could fly cast, and he really loved fly fishing and been to New Zealand. Ooh, the N word. Sorry about that. And he was going to this big trip in Alaska, and you can't go to Alaska unless you have a 25-foot sinking tip to get down to the silvers. It's just anywhere you go in the world, they ask you, do you have a teeny tip? There are a lot of lines. What it is a sinking tip on running line, and you just make one cast, like throwing a spinning line, and it's essential for anywhere you go in the world. And so I said, look, you can't false cast, and I'm showing it, and he says, hey, I'm getting this down. He was shooting to the end. Well, the show starts opening. So it's like 10 o'clock, and he didn't have to shoot till like 3 in the afternoon. And I said, well, the people are starting to come. And he says, yeah, I guess I better probably get going. He said, but I'm going to make one last cast. And I said, now, when you do this, I want you to take that back and release it way back. And he throws it. And this biker guy is walking up the aisle with this gal with a low-cut, rawhide dress on. And it goes over the barrier and hits her with a big fly on it, right in the chest. Bam. And the pool's about 6 inches deep, water. And he hands the rod to me. And I'm looking at this 250-pound guy running up the casting pool right at me. And I'm holding the rod. And he gets about 10 feet away. He goes, Robin Williams. Stops. And then he goes into his little routine. And the girl's looking at me. And I'm trying to get away, and now all the crowd comes around, and the police are there, and it was a portal, so we had an escape route.
Yeah.
And so that evening I was done at 10 o'clock, and they have a Williams Hill restaurant, really nice restaurant there. And when I got there, I always eat there because it's late at night. And he said, "Well, Mr. Williams bought your dinner, Arctic char." And a bottle of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And he said, I'm working, but, I had a lot of just wonderful experiences with people. And it's just a shame that nowadays, if it's not on and it's fancy, but some of the down-home stories, you just don't have the Grits Greshams. You don't have these guys. John Garak would be the closest guy, the Trout bum guy.
Yeah.
And he is still the best-selling fly fishing author. And he and I've spent a lot of time fish. Well, not a lot, but enough. Few fishing trips and speaking engagements together. Very kind of private guy. Still drives an old Jeep Cherokee, and very intelligent. And but it's tough because we're in an age where we're entertained. You just don't sit down and talk anymore. Kids don't sit down and talk.
No, and that's the thing with my podcast is I'm trying to we tell people it's an hour because we don't want to take up their time, but we honestly have
they can come back and
I know, but
BS.
The truth is we have no time limit on this podcast.
Well,
we're at over an hour and 50 minutes, and I'm not stopping you.
Montana State. We just kept going, and he says, well, gosh, I guess we're going to have to make an exception for you. We're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like, it's already an hour. It's so much fun. I remember, there's so much that I could tell you. One of the great experiences of my life was spending 7 days with Ted Williams, the baseball player, and going out to eat with him and Gowdy. and listen to the stories. And I want to leave you with this, because this is the last story. He was doing the National Sporting Goods Show in Chicago. This was in 1978. He was the keynote speaker. Everybody was there. Muhammad Ali, you name any sports figure, they were at the show. 75,000 people. And Kurt was doing the ending banquet. Ted Williams, Muhammad, all of them were all in the front row. And he's doing his stick. And when we were done, went out, and there was a limousine there. And it just, damn it, this show, I told him I didn't want limousines. I wanted to go in cabs. This is Kurt talking. And Ted always looking to see who was going to see him. And, he's a big guy.
Yeah.
Very recognizable at that time. Well, we get in the car and we go back to the Ambassador East, where we had these beautiful suites. I was like 28 years old. I'd never been in a suite before. And so Kurt stopped the car a block and away from the hotel. He says, I don't want to see anybody see this sportscaster come out of a limousine. We'll walk. Williams didn't like that. Well, no, we're going on, and all of a sudden this guy come running in a long wool coat out. Says, Mr. Gowdy, Mr. Gowdy. And Williams just started distancing himself, started stepping back. He says, look, do you remember this game? And he says, that's when I had better times. And I remember you talking a game, and I just would go to sleep listening to you call that game. He said, I just want to tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart. And Kurt reaches in his wallet and says, here, $100 bill. And the guy says, no, Kurt. People take care of me. I don't need your money. I just want to tell you thank you. When he turned around, he put the $100 bill in the guy's pocket. And Williams was just astounded. He come up and said, I don't believe I saw what I saw. He says, Jack, we're not having a drink. If you don't mind, I want to talk to Kurt by myself. And that's when he made the decision to tip his hat.
Nice.
I mean, what kind of money can you put on something like that? How can
you can't put
money
on that.
He called me all the time. He would just call and talk. He didn't have many friends. Kurt was one of his friends. And it was funny because when he died, Sports Illustrated called me. I said, well, what are you calling me? No, we want to know about it's but one of the greatest things with that is it led to having a story about the one fly in Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the highlights. Anyway, let's go.
Yeah, but I do want to ask, is the one fly where the double bunny got outlawed?
Yes. Well, it didn't get outlawed.
But we'll talk. Okay, let's talk about that next time, buddy. We're doing this
real quickly. Here's the thing: because he was slinging a streamer, everybody thought that would inhibit the guy in the back of the boat, so they banned that size. And of course, what a good line banning the streamer. And of course, all the magazine picked up on it. And Scott worked for us and then worked for Bailey, and it was a great stick. But it's actually kind of slipped back, streamers.
I've got a ton on double bunnies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can use the double bunny. It just can't be of certain size, and it can't be with a cone head. Look.
No, it can be whatever I tie it when I go fishing.
Hey, the one fly was meant to be a joke. And what happened is a guy drowned in the first one, and we made it a fundraiser. And then all of a sudden,
I didn't know that.
His 2 kids through college.
I did not.
What do we do with this money we make? And then like anything, it became super competitive, and it has its history of its own. But
I did not know the history on that. The only thing I knew about the single fly was the double bunny. I did not know that.
Well, it's wonderful. When I send you these books, I'll send you. I've got a couple extra copies of the program book, which outlines all the flies that have won the one fly.
Oh, that would be great.
And I also
Guys,
will present you with a poster from the 10th anniversary.
I will hang it up. I will
All right.
hang it up.
Time to say goodbye to all those people and the ones that haven't gone to sleep. Thank you for watching. And by the leaders. That sounds really, really good on the leaders.
Yeah.
And keep working. Good program. You
And,
will find it.
and you will be back with us.
I'll be back.
Guys, this is Sean from Kayak Flyer, an American treasure, a living legend. Jack Dennis.
A
He's
living
going to
legend
be.
in my own mind. Tell everybody, though, if you want to know about what I was talking about flies, go to Wonderfulness for You, www.umqua.com. They have the most beautiful whale on flies. And you can take a look and kind of get some ideas of the flies that we talked about, like the Clouser minnow and some of the things. And you can just go crazy. But when you see the 2,000 flies they have there, remember, there's 20 of them that'll bring home the bacon.
Yep.
Good night.
And if you're going to buy those flies, guys, go to doodleyflyfishing.com, save 15% promo code Kayak. We'll see you next week, and we're going to have Nick Chabaria, my personal fly fishing friend, who just won the BOS down in Darnell, Arkansas. He's going to be on the show. Jack, did you have any
Does
last
that
words?
have money with it?
Yeah, he got $6,700 in his second professional tournament, and he only went because one of his buddies was there.
Hey, isn't that cool? We have a contest in fly casting, and it's called Top Gun, and we give $3,000 away. It's the first time that anybody's ever given any money, and this world champion won it. And I said, we did a TV interview, and he said, well, how much money did you win when you won the world championship? She goes, that amount?
Yeah, nothing. Nothing. Yeah. And we've had Christine Fisher and Drew Gregory on the show. They're both going to come back on. They were both fishing, and my personal friend that didn't have a kayak until he met me goes down there and wins the big show. Guys, this is Sean. Adam will be back with us next week. We'll have Nick Chabaria. Guys, tight lines and wet waders, man.